will start, and you will have to agree that it's okay. I didn't hear anyone who is not okay with that, so thanks. There were some people who couldn't join today, so they will appreciate, hopefully. Okay, we would like to ask the roundtable guests to introduce themselves very, very briefly, like maybe what is your research approach or your research focus, what is your name, and briefly the position in the respected journals. That would be great. Like a deeper presentation will come later, but maybe just a first very quick round of introduction. I'm Stephanie. Could you maybe start?
Sure. Thanks, Suzanne. And I have to say you pronounced my surname perfectly, which doesn't happen very often. I'm Stephanie Allais, and I'm one of the 3 editors of JVET, the Journal of Vocational Education and Training. But you want to know about my personal research interests, Suzanne?
Yes. Yeah.
I research, I would say, development, international education and development from the perspective of education and work. It's mainly focused on vocational education, but not only. I do some research on higher education and a lot of work on skills policies, on-the-job learning, those kinds of things. But focused very much on low and middle income countries, mainly Africa, but not only, and looking at the roles of education policies at a systemic level in relation to development, employment, those kinds of issues. But I look at it both from a political economy perspective and also from a curriculum perspective. And I think it's kind of they're 2 very, very different research traditions, actually, and they don't often come together. So one of the things that I try to do in my research is bring together perspectives that really engage in debates about knowledge, expertise, learning, acquisition of expertise with political economy of education and training systems.
Great, thank you. Who wants to continue? Lizzie?
Hello, everybody. I am Lizzie Knight. I'm a researcher at Victoria University in so-called Australia, and I'm coming to the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and we're trying to think a lot about the First Nations people here in Australia. My research is mainly on higher and vocational education. I am talking tonight about my role as a special issue editor, as in the editor of one single special issue in the International Journal of Training Research, and where we're looking at tertiary and the movement between vocational and higher education. We have some colleagues here, and I also work in career development. I'm now actually have moved away, and so this is sort of from academia, and I've been working for the Australian government, but I'm speaking in my honorary academic role tonight.
All right, thank you. Christoph, would you like to continue? Where is he? Is he not here anymore? Okay, he comes later, I think. Okay, Jay.
Hi, my name is Jay Plasman. I am I do a lot of work. I'm here at the Ohio State University in the United States. I am an assistant professor in the Workforce and Development and Education program. A lot of my work is broadly focused on educational policy in the United States, with a kind of specific focus on college and career readiness and what we in the United States call career and technical education, which is not exactly the same as vocational education and training, but maybe the closest thing we have here in the United States. I believe my role for today is to focus, bring a reviewer's perspective, but I also am a an associate editor for the International Journal of Training and Development, which so I'll try to keep my roles separate and not get them overlapped.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Lena?
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Lena Kriszewski and I work at the Institute for Innovation and Technology in Berlin. I used to work at university for years, but now I'm more in consultancy, maybe we can say that like that. I have been working for really many years now on international cooperation in vocational education and training. My PhD was on international mobility of apprentices. So I look at how the German system gets more international, but I also do some research projects and evaluations on cooperation between different systems or different institutions in different countries. So yeah, that's my background. And yes, and I'm responsible with other colleagues together for the screening of papers at the JVET, meaning that when we receive submissions, we make a first check whether we think they are worth forwarding to reviewers. So that's my role.
Thank you very much. I received a message from Christoph and the whole Wi-Fi at Osnabrück University is not working at the moment, but he will join us hopefully with Silke Lange as soon as it's possible again. So then he can introduce himself later. All right. We have received some of your questions in advance. Thanks.
Sorry, Suzanne, I just wanted to say, and I was happy to hear that people in rich countries also have Wi-Fi problems. I'm gonna, we actually, I think you might or might not know that in South Africa, we have a chronic electricity crisis. And I've currently lost power. So I might have to switch my camera off at some point, but I'll keep it on for as long as I can. I think I didn't actually say I'm in Johannesburg at the University of the Witwatersrand, the Center for Researching Education and Labor.
Yeah, thanks for adding this information. In Germany, we are rather making fun of the infrastructure problems on Wi-Fi and Deutsche Bahn, for example, we are having here. But this is not that serious, of course. Okay, we received some of your questions and we're thinking to have a first moderated round of questions with your topics of interest that you were sending us. So now I have to skip the first one because this actually would have been addressed to Silke and Christoph. Should we then ask the second one, Junmin? What do you think? We just continue, right?
Yes, I think we can continue. As Solana has mentioned, we want to moderate this first part of the question session. That means that we have selected some questions we think we can direct it to one guest of the roundtable to start with this discussion, and then the other guests from the roundtable feel free to join and to complement it and to add some comments or respond or from your perspective. And then the audience are able to put up your hand as well if you want to add some comments or questions certain for this question. So the first question we want to start is one of the emerging researcher who has asked about, do you have any recommendations for researchers who do interdisciplinary research and make use of vocational education and training to understand other phenomena, for example, political economic system, and still get well published in JVET journals? So this is a very long question with many information. And I would like to pass this question at first to Jay, because Jay, you are one of the associated editor member of the International Journal of Training and Development and also associate professor based in Ohio State University in the USA. And as I know, in Anglo-Saxony regions, vocational education training is more considered as an interdisciplinary research between educational science, but also labor market and political science. So therefore, I would like to direct this question to you at first. Let me repeat the question briefly because it's a long question, so then you can start with your comment. So the question is, do you have any recommendations for researchers who do interdisciplinary research and make use of vocational education and training to understand other phenomena, for example, political, economic system, and still get well published in vet journals? So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think taking an interdisciplinary approach to vocational education and training is super important. As you mentioned, in the United States, it's almost entirely interdisciplinary now with respect to vocational education and training or career and technical education. So I will say in the United States, the journals that are focused on vocational education and training are often not as highly regarded as some other education journals or public policy journals, economics journals. So it's often if you want to be in more high-ranking journals, it's in the United States. It's much more important that you do try to take some of those interdisciplinary approaches. From an international perspective, from the International Journal of Training Development, I think it always adds a very interesting additional lens to what you're working on, to bring in those different perspectives. I think it's important to have someone who is very knowledgeable of vocational education and training doing, framing everything, but I think bringing in those additional perspectives can improve the odds in a lot of cases of getting published in a really high level journal. So my recommendation is to do it, but to make sure that it still is reasonably understandable by the audience that you do want to reach.
Yes, Joe, thank you very much for your recommendation. I think one point you have emphasized very important is the target group, because as mentioned in this question is about publishing in vocational education training journals. And of course, the reader of the journals, they are more familiar with vocational education training, but maybe not so with other phenomena or interdisciplinary connections. So I think this is very good advice from you to say that maybe we have to make it more clear for the reader the other disciplinary connections to the vet readers. Yes, thank you very much. I would like to pass this question as well to Christoph. I think he's here again. Or Christoph, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Yeah, because I think at first the journal of Silke and Dietmar, the International Journal of Vocational Education Study, you have mentioned this interdisciplinarity as a very important perspective in the aim of your journal as well. And as I know from your own publication with Dietmar that you have mentioned this interdisciplinary focus, which is dealing with other discipline, but to analyze that as an object, a research object. So I'm very interested in your perspective as well and in the journal. Yes.
Yeah. So I think interdisciplinary research in social science is inevitable, right? So I think it's clear that there's no that theory in the sense that there's a theory of physics or a theory of chemistry. So there's no one language that we all speak, especially in this international context, right? So with the International Journal of Vocational Education Studies, we acknowledge this fact, and we invite scholars from different social sciences to research and discuss vocational education in its various forms and phenomena. But what Dietmar and I discussed in the mentioned paper was that we should never forget that when you look at vocational education from a distinct perspective, then you also take part in that language, in the sense that when you're talking about, let's say the shortage of skilled labor in a context, and you are discussing this phenomenon with a theory from political economy, then you agree implicitly with this theory. But here, at least here in Germany, I would say, or I can only speak for myself, I identify as an educational scholar. So I look at vocational education from a educational perspective. And so what does vocational education do for a young individual when it enters the workforce, the labor market? And discussing vocational education merely from a political economy theory or whatever sometimes can lead to the assumption that it is only about economical questions, but it's not, right?
Yes, thank you, Christoph, as well for your perspective. I think one thing you have mentioned here very important is also that the vocational education has different philosophy and theories behind it, and depending on the depending on the perspective you look into the vocational education chain, as you have mentioned, you look from the perspective of an educational scientist, and this is a little bit different from the philosophy and the function of vocational education for someone who looked from the political science into this perspective. And to make it more clear what is the philosophy and the theory you agree with behind your project, I think this is very important, as what you have mentioned as well, because vocational education is so in between, but they have different functions depending on different perspectives. So we have two more guests who want to share their thoughts with us. Look, this is at first Lena.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I agree with all what has been said before, but I would like to add one point, which is, from my perspective, the focus of the research question, because the question is whether the paper will be published in one of our journals. And as a screener, I would say it depends on the focus of the research question. Is the VET system used as a case to explain something in another discipline, for instance, labor market studies or something like that? Or is approaches from other disciplines used to learn something, to explain something, makes clear about TVET as a system or how it works? So the question is, where do you, is TVET your object of research, or is it just a case you use to answer a research question which is located in another discourse, which will be maybe not so relevant for the audience of our journal? So this is really, it relates, of course, to the question of the target group. So who is the audience you want to reach with your article?
Yes, Lena, thank you very much. I think it's also important, and totally agree that the research question should make it at first very clear where's your standing point here. Yes, thank you. So Stephanie.
Here's the muted.
Sorry, I thought I'd unmuted. I was going to say something similar to Alina, which is, we get a lot of papers which are a study that is based in a vocational college, but they don't deal with a single vocational education question. So, I completely agree with Christoph. Social sciences are inherently interdisciplinary, and education is inherently interdisciplinary. So you are going to be drawing on, if you're publishing in vocational education, you're going to be drawing on different disciplines. But what we would be looking for when we screen and when we decide whether or not to send out a paper to reviewers is, are you engaging with a debate that is a debate in literature on vocational education? Have you cited a paper in this journal or in any other vocational education journal? If your concern is a very narrow or specific one about cognitive development, and it just happens to be the case that your study is located in a vocational college, or if you're trying to explore a broader political or economic question, and it happens to be the case that your study is dealing with vocational education, then we would probably not look at it. So I think that bringing those 2 points together is really important. But one last thing that I would add is that when you are working in an interdisciplinary perspective, it is important to be true to the different disciplines that you're drawing on. And I think that is often a downfall of a lot of interdisciplinary research, where people use concepts in quite a superficial way, particularly concepts from economics are kind of transported into other disciplines as if without regard to their kind of context and what they mean in a broader web of conceptual framing. So I would say that that's something to be alert to, but then, your research is probably going to be interdisciplinary. The question is, why do you want to publish it in a vet journal? Presumably because you want to be in dialogue with the research community that is working on some aspect of vet. And so that's what we really are looking to see in your paper.
Thank you so much to both, because you draw the first line to our second question, because you say that it's important in how far authors engage in vocational education and training debates. And the next question we would like to ask is, what, from the perspective of those who do the screening, so we ask this to Lena at first, because this is her role in IJRVET. What are most common reasons for articles to be rejected, and how can emerging researchers best avoid rejection?
Yes, thank you for that question. It's really a privilege to be invited to tell something about it, because sometimes it's a little bit frustrating to be rejecting articles because of so obvious reasons. And I think there are two main, from my point of view, two main reasons why articles get rejected. The first one is when the theoretical framework, the methodology, and the results are not aligned. This seems really trivial, something we should not have to say, but this is really something important, and many articles get rejected because of that. So when I read a paper, I want to understand the story behind it. So there must be a red thread between the research question, the theoretical framework, why was it chosen and not another one? How does the theory relate to the methodologies which were chosen? And how do the results relate to the theory, and what is the added value for the research? So I would say there is a very easy way to check whether you fulfill that criterion of alignment. It's if you can just delete one section of the paper and the reader doesn't notice, then it means that you don't need it and you can drop it. Yes, so this is very important, that there must be a red thread and so that the reader really understands the argument. Then the second reason why some articles or many articles indeed get rejected is that they have a practical focus only. So by saying this, I mean that they are merely consultancy papers showing problems and proposing solutions, but they don't have really a research question. They don't identify research needs at the beginning of the article. They don't highlight the added value of the paper in a research discourse, so compared to existing literature. So this is very important, that there is an added value for the research and not only for practice. So it's legitimate, of course, to also reflect about practical implications of your research. But if this is the focus, then maybe it's not the right place for that article. And criterion we look at also in our screenings is in the conclusion and discussion part at the end of the article, whether the author takes a critical perspective on his or her own research. So do you reflect about limitations of the study? Do you identify also further research needs? Because to do that, it means that you have to relate also to existing literature. So I think these are the two biggest problems why articles get refused. And then many articles are not very good in spelling English, etc. And sometimes I also think it would be so easy just using DeepL or whatever AI tools you can use for free to improve the translation, because it's very seldom a reason for rejecting a paper when it's poorly written, but it doesn't help. So I think that's it for first. Maybe you want to add.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lena. I actually have written down 4 points from what you told us, like the red thread, the contribution to the world of research, so not a practical focus only, a critical conclusion also regarding their own research approach, and also the language maybe. So that's a lot for a first insight. Thank you very much. And Lizzie, you want to add something?
Yes, I was just going to add something about sort of why articles get rejected, and sort of also link it into the first discussion from my perspective as an editor of a special issue. I think, and often special issues are invited, as you know, but many times you also have open calls for people to submit their article to a special issue. And I think, and I may be wrong, and I'd be happy to debate this, is it sort of an intensified idea of a conversation that goes in within a journal. And I think that those comments from Stephanie, particularly about following the themes and trying to take part in the conversation, is a really critical way for emerging researchers and all researchers. Almost seeing as the journal as, a round table, a panel. You were talking about, you want to contribute to those who you have spoken before, you want to extend and not just, is that a question or is it just a comment, making, adding something to it. And for a special issue, I think there's a defined conversation, as it were, that hopefully is defined by a sort of, terms of reference of the special issue, key research questions that you may, and I think they're a really good sort of starting point for emerging researchers to build on. But you also have that issue, and I think you see both in general journal submissions, but also for the special issues. And I don't say that I have not personally been guilty of this, of trying to, squeeze your own article that you already had prepared into a special issue. And I mean, I think that's, the way of the world, but in a way you really do have to think deeply about how you can contribute to the conversation. As Lena said very, articulately, you can sort of really think about your conclusions, what that contribution, and both frame it up in the introduction and the conclusion to do it. So thanks for.
Thanks. So yeah, of course, the connection to the special issue should be there, especially from your perspective. Thank you. Is there anybody else from the roundtable guests? Oh yeah, Jay, you want to add something to this question?
Yeah, so I think from the perspective of a reviewer, one of the things that I often look for is to be able to identify right at the very beginning of the paper what the paper is aiming to do. If I get to, the end of page 2 or 3 and I still don't know what the paper is talking about, that's not a very good sign. Also, echoing what Lena said with respect to aligning all the theory, the methodology, the discussion, that should all align, and engaging with the current literature, with the current research. I want to make sure that the author has a handle on what's already been done. And then I think the last thing is, in the discussion, you need to, it needs to be general enough, especially in international journals. If we work in often such small spaces, but we need to find a way to make it appealing to the broader international audience. So I think that's.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That suits to what Lena has said, that there must be the red thread, and to tell very, very early what is my article about is quite important. Thank you. Junmin and Stephanie.
Yes, thank you. I just have one question, because we have two types of rejection for publication in journals. We have at first, this is first stage of the desktop rejection. And if it's not accepted at this stage, then we have the reviewer who are deciding about revision or rejection. So my question here is, for the first stage of the desktop rejection, what are the criteria that you will reject at the first stage already? Thank you.
So shall I tell something about that? Yes. So for the IGRVET, we have a list of criteria. So first we look at the relevance of the topic and whether it is within the scope of the journal. So if it's not about JVET, then no chance to get published. And we get a lot of articles about higher education or primary education or whatever. Then the second is about the theoretical framework and engaging with the literature. So we look whether it makes sense and whether there is a link between the research question and existing literature. Then we look at the results. So no, sorry, first we look at the methodology. So what kind of methodology has been chosen? Why has it been chosen? Does it align with the theoretical framework? And yes, is it logical and can you understand it? Is it precise enough? Then we look at the results, how are they presented? And then we look at the discussion conclusion part, especially whether the conclusion is more than just a summary, and if it also makes the bridge between the research question and the added value of the paper, also taking this critical stance. But yeah, usually we have different ways of dealing with the paper. So there is pure rejection and clear forwarding recommendation for it to go to the reviewers. But sometimes it happens that papers are not well developed enough, but they are still very interesting. So sometimes it also happens that we ask for resubmission already at this initial stage, when we have the feeling, for instance, that there is rich empirical material there and interesting questions, but it's not well written, or the theoretical part is not explicit enough, then we can go back to the authors and ask for resubmission.
Thank you, Lena. Does anybody want to add something to Junmin's question, to the criteria that are working for the first screening, for the first choice of which articles continue the review process?
Yeah.
Stephanie.
Can I jump in? And I completely agree with everything that the colleagues have already said. And obviously the formal issues are very important. Does the article say where it's going, the golden thread, all of those things? But I think the point that Lizzie made about how is it contributing to the literature is it could be a very beautifully designed study, and you say, this is what I did, and this is how, and this is what I found out, but actually it's not engaging with vocational education literature, and it's therefore not making a contribution to our journal. But I just wanted to emphasize that, but I wanted to add one new point, and that is that we desk reject an enormous number of quantitative papers that spend a lot of time explaining the quantitative methodology, which of course you do have to do if you're doing a detailed quantitative paper, but spend very little time explaining the constructs used and how they actually use their tool. So, there'll be like 2 pages giving precise details of the regression analysis and how the regression analysis was tested and the different ways in which but the actual survey that was done or questionnaire that was done uses a very, very weak construct that doesn't actually at all test the thing that they think it's testing, because they've taken a very superficial term and sort of turned it into a questionnaire. And usually those are also the papers that have little or no engagement with vocational education literature. And usually my sense when I get these kinds of papers is that they're not a vocational education researcher. They're a researcher who's been trained in running regression analyses. They choose anything. So they choose a word, they send out a questionnaire, they ask it to a bunch of people, and then the kind of assumption seems to be, as long as your regression analysis is done in a very rigorous way, you are making a contribution to knowledge. But you're not making a contribution to knowledge if your theoretical constructs are not valid and meaningful and useful and have purchase in the social world. And that's where lots of quantitative studies really seem to fall off the bandwagon and get gonged out in the first round.
We see Lena applauding, and we see Christoph's hand, and I welcome Silke. So happy to have you here as the editor of JVET. And you want to add something to this discussion?
No, I just raised my hand so that you all see that Silke is here. I'm joking. No, I wanted to say I totally agree with you, Stephanie. But I think so a lot of journals, they have to limit their the length of the papers, right? So usually it's about 12 pages or something like that. So when you do quantitative research, of course you focus on the methodology or the questionnaire or whatever. And this is actually why we decided at IJOS that we publish slightly longer papers. So it's totally fine with us if you send us 30 pages long studies. But if I may add a personal thing, I'm totally fine if people send us studies that are 30 pages long and deal with theoretical questions.
Yeah, great, thanks. Anything else regarding these questions on the rejection of papers in the very first place? Okay. Now we have other questions.
Yes. At first, I want to motivate the audience as well. If you want to comment or ask some questions regarding to this point, please just put up your hand. We will see it, and you will come up to ask your questions, or you can have your question in the chat so we can get it as well. Now It's very interesting, Christoph, you have mentioned that your journal, yes, you're open for the amount of the pages, because sometimes it's very challenging, especially for people who are doing their PhD and they want to publish a more intensive description of theories and result and this challenge. So it's very nice that your journal is allowing more than just 12 or yes, pages. The upcoming question now is dealing with PhD as well. The question is about that people, some of the emerging researchers are planning to undertake their PhD by publication. So what advices do the panel have for engaging with journals during this process? So this is more about the connection between the PhD project, the publication in this project, and how to deal with the journals and the publication. I would like to give Stephanie at first the word, as I think because of your double role as well, because you are a professor at the University of the JVET in South Africa, but you are editor as well, and then we can pass this question by to the other guests. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I think that as a professor, I would say that the challenge with doing a PhD by publication, and I don't mean that you shouldn't, I think there's a lot of advantages to doing it, but what's tricky and what you've got to think about is what's going to hold those different publications together, and how are you going to make sure that the three, I presume it's going to be three, that's what it usually is, the three publications will add up to something that's bigger than three separate publications. Because a PhD, when you do it as a single study, one of the things that is kind of special but also formative about it is that it's this huge piece of research. For many people, it's the biggest piece of research that they ever do, just one thing for a very long time. Now, are your three pieces parts of one bigger thing, or do you have a theoretical framing that you are testing, which make it one bigger thing, but you're testing it in three different ways or exploring three different aspects of something? So I would say, from a supervisor's perspective, that would be my question. What's the bigger picture? And then that leads me to the journal editor's role, because the journal editor has got a different perspective on it, and this is what could create tension. The journal editor wants to know, what is special and interesting about this article on its own? As a journal editor, I don't want to know that you've got two other articles that are going to explain in more detail the conceptual framing and the other piece of information that you found out, which actually is what makes this interesting, because you see, when you're writing the PhD as one single piece, you can show them all in relation to each other. So it's a wonderful thing to do if you can do it. But you do need to be able to convince an editor that this 10 to 30 page piece tells a single coherent story, which is robustly, I've got a robust methodology that I've applied, and it makes a contribution to literature in its own right. This is what it shares in relation to some key debates in the literature. But you also need to then be able to go back to your supervisor and your examiner and your committee and say, these three pieces, which each tell a story in their own right, which each make an individual contribution, actually also tell a bigger story. Now, most people, once they've finished a PhD, want to do that process in reverse. So when they finish their PhDs, try to say, look, here's this one big thing that I've done, but look, it actually tells us something interesting about this issue and this issue and this issue. So, people might publish between 1 and 5 papers of their PhD. So, you know, you're kind of doing the same thing either way. You're coming at it from a different direction. But I think the direction that you come at it from, you need to be very conscious of it in the process, so that you are bearing in mind that that's what each of these two different readers are looking for, and they're looking in a way for something quite different that you've got to be able to convince them of separately.
Thank you, Stephanie. I think you have made it very clear, this conflict, but also the importance to balance between this bigger picture and the single picture of the articles. So thank you very much for that. Lizzie, you want to add?
I do, but I have to say that I put up my hand before Stephanie had talked, and she's made many of the points. But I just thought I would come to it from a slightly different angle, you know, and not cover the same ground. From the field that I work in a little bit, you know, like Jay, in career development and technical education, many people do PhD by publication, particularly in Australia, and I'm not sure Jay might comment in the US. And I think that that's very interesting. And I think, you know, as Stephanie talked about, my PhD was a monograph, and I cut it up. And part of that process was sort of thinking the unique but standing findings that could, you know, really be big enough and good and substantive enough to make a contribution to literature. And so all I would say is that I think what's interesting about doing a PhD by publication is I didn't have those findings till quite far along in my study, and they changed very many times, and I wrote far too much and did all the fabulous things that PhDs do wrong, which was really a very good learning process for me. And so I think that that's quite interesting, is that the PhD by publication, not declaring your publication items too early, and so reading and engaging with the journals and engaging with that conversation. And, you know, I'm a very huge believer in very simple things like getting the email digest and just reading them, you know, religiously every issue. And so you say, oh, they're mentioning that again, or that's in my, you know, and that horrible thing many of us will have seen of the journal article kind of pops up on your email. It's like, oh, I was writing that article, sort of. And but I think you take that as a good sign, and so just be really immersing yourselves in the journals that you might be aiming for later while you're in your early stages of the PhD. I think the PhD by publication can be harder than that sort of full model, but that is not to say it's not worthwhile and a great contribution.
Thank you very much, Lizzie. Do anyone want to contribute with comments or questions to this point? Okay, so I think we can go to the next question.
Yeah, the next question is rather process-oriented to all those who are in this business maybe since a long time or since a longer time already. One of our participants has asked in advance, how has publishing on vocational education and training evolved during your career? So how did things change? Maybe what has come up during the last years? And Lizzie, we were thinking about asking you this question at first. Others can complement further.
Thank you, Suzanne. And I saw this question, and I was thinking back. I haven't been an academic that long, and no longer am really, but I was thinking back also to my master's, which I started 20 years ago in London. And so I was thinking about how, you know, scholars in the UK and in Australia and also in Europe have written differently. I mean, I thought I'd also mention vocational education is our focus, but also to think about what I would call the field of lifelong education and adult education as well. And I mean, I think, you know, and perhaps this is my work role as a sort of labour market vet person is I think that there's some really interesting trends in terms of employment of academics and researchers across the world, which has really changed some of the patterns of publishing. And I think it's something that we don't talk about enough, and so I am going to, about how publishing is influenced also by research funding, by research positions, and that actually we have to have time and space to write and to actually do research that is meaningful and deep and thoughtful after our doctorates or during. And I think that there has been certainly a change in the people writing on vocational education in over that 20 years that I've been having those email alerts, and that I think that I wouldn't want to make any grand narratives and grand themes that have changed. I think that there are things like PISA which have come in over that period, which obviously have contributed to a quantitative bent in many ways, and so I think that's been an emerging theme over that period. I think recently you have, and I know we're going to talk about this, things like AI, things like micro-credentials, things like, and also obviously in the last few years about the pandemic and the impact of vocational education on those kind of things. But I think the employment of both ECRs, and I'm very privileged, I'm a second generation academic. And my father, tells me often about him walking to the university saying he has his honours degree and given a continuing lectureship and funded for his PhD, and that was lovely in the 70s. And, it's a very different setting for us, and for us to have the reflection and the space to make significant contributions has impacted publishing, I think.
Thank you. These were different points already, like the content-related topics of like AI, micro-credentials, whatever, and also the funding perspective, which is important for all of us who have to check in how far our salary can be paid, and in how far universities or research institutions can afford to hire us anymore. So thanks for bringing up this point. Does anybody else want to add something?
So I'll add a little bit about my perspective. So I've only been doing it for about 10 years in this area, but in the United States, just in that time, I've seen it becoming a lot. And this relates back to one of the original questions about the transdisciplinarity. It's become a lot more transdisciplinary, and you have a lot more folks coming into the field who maybe don't have the background in vocational education and training, and that's very evident in a lot of the new publications and where those publications go. So which journal outlets the authors are looking to send them to, and so what I've seen is I'm seeing a lot more articles and studies on vocational education training, or CTE, that are not published in the journals that are focused on vocational education training. It's becoming a lot more kind of political economy or public policy or broader education policy. So I think that's an interesting trend, but I'm not exactly sure what that means for vocational education and training as a unique field.
Yeah, thanks. The transdisciplinary point is also one thing. Maybe what I think in the past, you were always like following one type of scholar schools, like which group do I belong? And I think those borders, they broke up. This is maybe one of my things that I realized thinking about this question. Stephanie, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I would like to add two things that I think have changed. One picks up from Jay's point, and one that I think has remained the same, but looks like it's a difference. So I agree in relation to Jay's point. I mean, there's two things that I would say. The one is that there's more interest in the field. which means, and I think that's the challenge for researchers, for all of us, is that there's more published and it's harder to sift through and figure out what is actually really useful and important and what isn't. And I think that is definitely a change in the last 20 years. There's a lot more published in general. There's more journals. There's more vocational education journals. As Jay said, there's more journals that are publishing on vocational education that aren't vocational education journals. He was mentioning fields in which people might publish on vocational education. I want to take a more negative view and mention the predatory journals, which generally are not in any field. They generally have very kind of generic names. And so the problem is, and it relates to the first question about when we desk reject papers on site, is that it's, you know, people are often citing papers that are from very, very unreputable journals that are not actually located in the core bodies of debate and literature and conceptual ideas. So and I think that that's going to become more and more difficult, you know, because just as more and more stuff gets published, and as vocational education has become an increasing interest from the policy world because of growing youth unemployment, because of, you know, there's a whole range of different reasons. It's a particular focus from my perspective in low and middle income countries, where every development agency in town is now trying to reform the vocational education system of every low and middle income country. So I'd say that those are two very distinct changes. More publications in more journals, making it more difficult to be able to sift through, and more interest in the topic, in the broad area. And so both of those combined mean that there's a lot more noise in the field. I think that that's a very, very big change that's confronting people. But I do want to just flag that I also think there's a tendency to think that things are new when they're not, and that is a pathology of all educational research. So micro-credentials are like such a big topic, and it's exactly the same thing that was being researched 20 years ago, but under a different name, called unit standards or competence-based training, or, you know, it's not a different thing. Substantively, it's exactly the same thing. And it's been researched. So yes, in the policy world, things get reinvented and reinvented with a different name. But in the research world, it's important for us to not take policymakers at their word that they've come up with something new, but actually to look back at it critically and say, okay, is this something really new, or is it a new name for a very similar phenomenon to what we've seen before? Because if you don't do that, you're not adding to the body of knowledge. You're not starting from a huge pile of critical research that's already been done on a topic because you think that something is new. So yeah, so those are some changes, but just a little red flag about things that might look like they're changes, but they're not.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for that emotional comment on the amount and the numbers, the rising numbers of contributions. Anything else regarding this question? We also can see that the questions are not like separate, because like we have switches to other ones again, like to the question, why are articles rejected? And yeah. Nobody else at the moment, but we have I think 2 more questions that came in advance.
Yes, I think one question is very close to the comments before, because it's about the current development in our working societal community, and how it developed in the future. This is a very exciting and up-to-date question. So here we would like to put this direct to everyone here in the roundtable. And the question is, have you been able to notice the impact of generative AI in the manuscript submissions lately? And in what way could researchers benefit and use AI to improve their work, especially before submitting a manuscript, considering that it is not a good idea to give one's work to ChatGPT or any other platform for user use for free? So it's a very controversial but very recent question, and we are very excited about your comments and your perspective on it. A difficult question, yes. Lena, you want to go first?
Yeah, I make a start, but I'm sure I cannot say everything on that topic. Yes, first, the beginning of the question, personally, I didn't notice any changes, and I have never had the feeling when screening a paper that it was written by ChatGPT. But I indeed have a few ideas how ChatGPT or another tool could maybe help, at least for more formal aspects of writing a paper. Because I spoke a moment ago about language. So I think AI can help you make better translations if English is not your mother tongue and you are writing a paper in English. So you can ask for translations, for suggestions, and also for more catchy formulations. We discussed this sometimes, that submissions we receive have very long titles, which are not very attractive and don't give readers yet the desire to discover what's in the paper. And so ChatGPT might help there by making more poetic, or at least more yes, attractive suggestions for titles. And what we also notice is that often references are not in the way we want them to have in page 7 for the JVET. Maybe it could help there, but I did a check and it was okay. I don't know if it works always, depending on the type of publications. Maybe it's not reliable yet. So that's just a few ideas from my part.
Lena, thank you very much for your comment. I think especially for non-native speaker, if you want to publish in an English-speaking journal, I totally agree with you that the AI could support us with some proofreading assistance or to polish in our language. I think this idea is very good. I totally agree with you also about the risk. What about reference work? And you have mentioned we see it as well in some theses of the student when they are writing some academic thesis, that some part looks very strange and you can notice it on the reference, which is not adequate or is not, yes, not good. And this could be an indicator that the ChatGPT was here integrated in the work, yes. So more perspective and comments on it? Yes, Lizzie?
I draw here on my first work as a TEFL teacher, English as a foreign language. And I just want to say, I'm a native English speaker. And so I have, I'm constantly amazed. I speak a couple of other languages, but I don't write academically in any of them. And so I think, it's really important to think anyone publishing in a language other than native is amazing. I think that I've been involved in reviewing and early reviews, scanning, like Lena's talking about, in other journals over the last couple of years, of also, particularly in some places, I was the only native English speaker and I could read very quickly, and people would send it to me and say, this seems a little bit like, I don't know if you know the term uncanny valley. Does Do people know that term? It sort of is like a video game that there were innovations in the 90s, maybe, that they started to make video games look really like people, but you could tell that they weren't. It was almost too like people, that it was sort of like almost problematic, and it made you feel a bit like wiggly inside. I don't know how to express that in good English myself, but it sort of made you feel a bit wrong. And so there's something sometimes also with those AI programs that can really, another quite jargony word called spoof. It can make it look like a good language if you rely only on it, but it's very important that particularly I've seen people have abstracts produced from their work, and sometimes an abstract is so mangled because it's summarized, it doesn't seem like hang together. So I think it's important. I don't think AI is terrible, and I think that there are, well, as the question says, you know, important licensing issues about that in terms of things, but I think also there's this issue of that uncanny valley of making sure that it is your work. And I have to say that I think reading things out to yourself is almost better if you're at the level of language, you know, that to read it to yourself, to listen to it, to change the dualism of the language, I think is almost as good as putting it through an AI, and doesn't ever get that kind of estrangement from language.
Yes, thank you very much, Lisa, also for the risks you have mentioned, that we have to be critical about the suggestions for the AI and to prove it very critically. And Jay, you want to add?
Yeah, yeah, I don't think so. I haven't seen any direct like evidence that any papers have been completely generated by AI, at least, you know, to my knowledge. But I think it can also be useful, especially for, you know, early scholars, in just kind of generating some general ideas about what, you know, about how to proceed. I wouldn't take anything that it says for granted. A lot of times, some of these chat bots or whatever kind of make some things up. But I think it does give an interesting starting place if you're, you know, trying to dig in, particularly if you know you haven't done a whole lot of research and you're, you know, graduate students, PhD students, and things like that. I think it can bring together a lot of summarization of a lot of things to kind of give some good ideas. So I would use it more as a starting point as opposed to an actual publication tool at this point.
Yeah, can I hop in as the grouchy old lady on the call? Yeah, I mean, I'm not very tech savvy, and so I have not used it myself a lot. When I have tried it, I've been blown away at how useless it is at dealing with any of the issues that I would like a synthesis of the literature on. Like, such rubbish answers, like just mind-blowingly wrong at what it's citing and how it's citing. So, for example, it told me that skills anticipation systems in South Africa are working incredibly well. I mean, you know, you don't actually have to do a lot of research on South Africa to know that that isn't the case. I don't think anyone in South Africa thinks they're working well, except for the few government reports that the ChatGPT decided should be cited. So I really do agree with what Lizzie and Jay said, that it's a tool that you can use. But I think we have to be very, very skeptical of what it's synthesizing and how. But I also think, and this is where the grouchy old lady bit comes in, if you're using it to synthesize literature for you, you may not be actually learning the debates in the literature that you actually need to learn about in order to engage with the literature. So I don't think we should not use tools that are there. And I think using it for checking language and all of those things is wonderful. but you know, you could use it to synthesize the literature, but you won't be in a position to know if it's done a good job or not if you don't know anything about the literature. So, you know, I don't really think there's shortcuts to learning. I think there's shortcut, and I also want to say I agree with Lena that I have not seen submissions to the journal that I got any kind of, what was the phrase, funny valley feeling about. Definitely I've had it from student work, but not journal submissions. I'm sure they're coming. I'm sure we'll get them. But I do think that you know, and what I say to my students is you're either going to learn something or you're not. So, you know, as a student, it's about the difference between, which of course we know as researchers in the field, that the credential and the knowledge are two different things, and they have different values in the labor market and the workplace. And so, you know, cheating can help you get the credential. It can't help you to do the job better. And if your job is a researcher and you want to actually engage in debates in the literature, you need to know the literature.
Yes, I think it's a very important point you have mentioned also about the learning process, because of course every paper publication is a learning process also for senior researchers as well, because it's all about discussion analysis, and you will learn and develop your knowledge forward and your competency. And of course, in this point, I'm totally agree that ChatGPT is not a shortcut for learning. Yes. Christoph, do you want to add something as well as a young researcher?
No, not really. I'm also quite hesitant in using ChatGPT, for instance, or even for translating works such as DeepL. But that's just my academic background. Because I studied English, I got trained into trusting human translators and that stuff. So I don't really like to use it. And to be honest, I don't know any colleague who used it, but now that I said that, who would admit it, right?
Yeah, thank you very much. Do anyone want to add to the comments and discussion here? Okay, so can go to the next.
Yeah, we have one last prepared question. Maybe there will come up other ones, which are welcome as well. Our last question is, are there research topics that you have been missing or that you were waiting to see among the submissions in your respective journals? I will send it to the chat again so everyone can reread. And thanks, Lizzie, for the link so we can look it up again. Anybody who could answer first to the questions about research themes or topics that you are missing or that you would like to see among your submissions?
I don't really have an answer. There, Lena does.
Elena has it.
Yeah, so yeah, I just thought I could give it a go at first, because there are so many subjects and so many interesting subjects out in this world. So it's very difficult to say what we are missing. What we have a list of topics on our website of the JVET, and there are some where we receive only very little, a small number of submissions, and so sometimes I'm wondering why, and I think it could be more. So one of those topics is VET in the context of climate change, green transition, etc. We received a few in the past years, and they were mostly very good, and I think there's still room for more. VET and digitalization, we receive a lot of bad articles on that, so not very interesting, but I think it's also a field of research where we could benefit from more submissions. Systematic literature reviews are also something very useful, I would say, not only for young researchers. And yes, we could make use of more, and papers with a focus on theory. I think this is also something we find very interesting. And last but not least, papers written by or with researchers from the global south. I think there are some countries where there is some research, but it's not published or it's not well represented. And so when we receive something, we really try also, if it's not fulfilling all our standards, we try to give good remarks and hints for the authors to make it until review. And yeah, we would like to see more of that kind of research. So, but I think there are many more subjects.
Thank you, Lena. I was counting on you regarding this question to be answered. And to clarify, we are both working in the editorial office of JVET, so I work close with Lena in this point. Christoph.
Yeah, so the IJVES got started on the idea to really gain a more deeply understanding on different VET systems. So understanding in the sense of hermeneutics. And so I think what our editors are looking for are historical pieces, but also critical pieces. Critical in the sense of asking the question, who profits, for instance, from the dual system in Germany? What are the connections between companies and state? So looking at the deeper connections, the deeper structures of the VET systems, rather than doing more or doing other research that might be popular right now.
Okay, thank you, Christoph. Jay?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things in the U.S. that are really focal points right now, that may be interesting internationally as well. But one is there's a really big push to make causal connections between vocational education and whatever outcome. You know, it's often really hard to make those causal claims because participating in VT is such a personal choice for students a lot of times. And then there's another area that's kind of emerging now in cost-benefit analyses. What are the most efficient ways to get the outcomes that we're looking at? Are our approaches, a good use of financing? And so some of those areas are growing in the U.S. as far as kind of broadly in this area.
All right, thanks a lot. I was thinking of Stephanie's comment, who said that sometimes new topics come up, but just with a new name, that like it's the topic itself is not really new. So because the cost-benefit analysis, for example, was a point in Germany, I think in the 90s already. For example, Felix Rauner did a lot on this. So yeah, but I guess it's like maybe also shifting in regions, in world regions, sometimes which topics are relevant and which are focused. I don't see any other hand at the moment. So there was a question in the chat. Maybe we can move to that one. That's really interesting. Natalia, you ask, do you have any restrictions for authors in the current political situation? Actually, this is really interesting also for me what the other editors and the other roles on the roundtable would say to that. For JVET, I think I can respond, Lena, right? We have, for Russian authors, we have a standard answer to submissions because of the publisher of our journal. JVET is published under the roof of ERA, so the European Educational Research Association. So we follow their recommendation, and we send an answer to authors saying that that we do not take on any submission that comes out of the Russian Federation due to the war against Ukraine at the moment. But I'm interested how the other journals practice this at the moment.
I can only say that we welcome everyone, and obviously, as long as it's not propaganda. Yeah, but there's no restriction in our journal.
Okay, thank you.
As far as I know, there is no restriction for international journal and training development, but I could be missing something. But
okay, so very different possibilities to deal with the political situation.
Yeah, we don't have restrictions also in JVET.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, yeah, thank you. I think we have no more prepared questions left. Are there any other issues that came up during all that you have listened now to? And
there's a question in the chat from Robert from Uganda.
See that. Thank you.
And I wondered, Robert, if you want to just jump on and explain your question a little bit more. You're talking about participatory research that you've done, or just knowledge that you have of the donor and vet community?
Robert, are you there? There's an answer in the chat again. It's about the knowledge and experience regarding his practical work. Maybe there's a problem with the connection to switch on the microphone.
Yeah, I would say it's a tricky issue. Sorry, I keep switching my camera on and off to try and save the battery. Because it's very low and the power isn't going to come on again for another half an hour. I would say it's a tricky issue, and it is an issue that obviously confronts people who work in policy and who work in implementation of projects. But I think it is important to, if you want to publish on things that you know from your experiences, it is important to find a way of reflecting on them systematically. And there's a range of different ways in which you could do that. You did mention already, Robert, that you have got a body of literature. So that's one way of doing it, reflecting on your experiences in relation to issues in the literature, in such a way that you can actually take a step back from your experiences. The other way, I think, is, we quite often get students who want to do kind of participant observation studies, because they are a policymaker in, a national vet system, or they work in the qualifications authority or something like that. And it is important, we always try and help them to design studies which are quite reflective and make sure that they are, avoiding any possible bias, avoiding that they only look at some issues and not other issues, avoiding that their own interests dominate the research. So yes, you do learn a lot by working in a system, but you do have to find ways of writing that up and thinking about it. Firstly, that is very systematic, and secondly, that is located in a conceptual body of knowledge. I think it is definitely not a straightforward thing to do, but it is an important thing to do, because we do want to obviously hear from people who are engaging in policy, in development interventions, and so on. And it is, you know, I've done quite a lot of that kind of research myself, so I can testify to the complexity of it.
Thank you, Stephanie. Robert, does this answer your question? Okay. Okay, it seems it does. Thank you.
I think, Suzanne, that Robert wanted us to talk a little bit about literature review, and I just wanted to make one comment, drawing together both, you know, the growth of the field, AI, and things like this. I think that we've talked a lot about us writing and being part of the conversation, but I think that there is also an important thing about listening to the conversation. And I think now with AI tools and with things like EndNote and Zotero, where you can scrape everything in with just a click of a button, there's an idea that the literature, you have to read everything. So I think for Robert and for colleagues, it's really important to go to a core source and sort of almost like those mind maps and work out. You don't need to read everything that's ever been published about something. You need to find your core literature and know your body of where you want to sit. And so it's about sort of quality, and that's not to say different journals might not have quality, but quality and interconnectedness of literature sources. And I think that's the sort of overall for all publishing is the interconnectedness of academia. And that's the beautiful thing, I think. It's not, we're not writing alone, we're not writing talking to no one, we're talking to our colleagues, and it's just wonderful to be here with international colleagues talking about something we're interested in.
So can I add another little point? I think so. Following up on Robert, kind of continued questions in the chat. I think with respect to whether or not you want to write a comparative piece, that's really up to what your goal is. If you want it to be, you know, hey, here are some things that are going on in other countries that work for them. Here's what I've noticed in my country. You know, what are the similarities and differences, versus, you know, using those other countries as support for what you're finding and just talking about your experiences more uniquely. So I think whether it has to be a comparative study, it doesn't have to be, but it's really about what kind of your purpose and your goal for writing the paper ultimately would be kind of how I'd think about it.
I would like to just jump in and make one more point about VET in general in terms of international publication, which relates to Robert's question, but I actually also wanted to make it earlier. And that is, it's a very tricky thing, and I often actually get papers from the US that don't explain their system at all, but that does happen from other countries as well. And, you know, the thing about VET is that it is the least comparable part of any education and training system. It's much less, VET systems look much less similar to each other from one country to another than do school systems or university systems, which is not to say that they're identical, but VET systems are much more different. And, you know, Christoph already spoke about the challenge of length, and it is a challenge. And, you know, I also get frustrated when you've got to spend, you know, a fair amount of your paper where you want to be explaining your methodology and your theory and your findings. You've got to explain to the international audience that actually, when we talk about VET in South Africa or in Ethiopia or whatever it is, this is the thing that we're talking about. But it is unfortunately something that I think you have to do if you want to publish in an international journal that is looking at VET. You have to start by saying, in America, we have this thing called workplace readiness, and you might you know, that's what you would think of as vocational education in many other countries. And this is how it's similar. And these are the ways in which it's different. And this is where it's taught. And this is how, because it's amazing how different vet systems are, any of you who have engaged in comparative vet. And so I do just want to flag that in relation to Robert's question, but also in general as a piece of advice that, you know, we get quite a lot of papers that sort of just jump in. We wanted to look at the experience of people in a vocational college. And so we explored what the college students thought about this and that. And you're kind of 3/4 of the way through the paper before you even know what country you're reading about and what is the role of colleges in that country. And are these colleges senior secondary level or are they post-secondary? So it is a tricky thing, but I would say in general, we do need to try to situate our studies a little bit. Obviously, it depends on the study. So some would need more than others, and a comparative study would need some framing. But I do think that that is something that we need to bear in mind in general in our field.
Thank you so much. That was like a sum up already somehow, felt like it. Yeah, Robert, you say thanks as well. Okay, there are no individual questions at the moment anymore. I cannot see in the chat or see any risen hand. Therefore, we are coming to the last points that we have prepared at the moment. Junmin, you hand over, right?
Yes, thank you very much. I need to share my screen because I want to show you some slides. Okay, I think you can see this. Yes, I would like to show you this statistic data from the Springer Nature Journal rejection tracker. So the Springer Nature, they have a rejection tracker, and they have published some results from the year 2021 about Springer Nature journals, where they have rejected papers which have published later in a high quality journal, in the same quality like the Springer Nature journals or even higher. Just to show you here that that it is not the final decision if you get a rejection at first from a journal, that you can use, for example, the reviews to improve your paper, for example, and to submit it to another journal, maybe in the same quality, but also there are some data here as well that they are accepted in even higher quality journals. So this is the data I want to show you to motivate you as well, that to continue here and to use the rejection as opportunity as well, because you will get a feedback from the editor or from the reviewer. So you can use this opportunity and the feedback to improve your paper and to try again. Yes. And there's another finding as well here from the Springer Nature rejection, that there are some country-related rejections as well here, and you can see as well that there are they make a difference between rejection pre-review, so death rejection, but also rejection after the review. So you can see here some statistical as well, that the most of the rejection here were pre-reviewed because, for example, the theme is not very suitable to this journal. So it's not always because that the research question is not relevant or something, because they are published later in some other journals. Maybe they suit better in the thematic or in their different approach, or in their thematic profile. Yes, thank you very much. I think we are coming to the end of our event. Do anyone want to comment on this data about rejection, maybe from the guest of the roundtable? Okay, so now we are coming to the end, and before I want to say goodbye, I would like to address the audience. Maybe you can write into the chat some comments about what you have learned here from this event, what you want to give as feedback for the guests of the roundtable. So we can get here a feedback, because sometimes it's very hard to talk to the desktop, to the screen, and we don't know really what you think about, what's your thoughts, what you take away from the seminar. So it would be lovely if you can leave some feedback here, or question or comments, or also improvement suggestions, that we can take it with us as well as a feedback from your side. Yes, that would be lovely. So I think it was a very intensive look behind the scenes of the journal publication here, and this insights will help us as early or emerging researcher in vocational education to understand the process of submission and review and rejections. So we would like to thank you, the roundtable guests who joined us from all over the world. So it is very nice to have you here presented from different countries and regions and time zones. So some of you got up in the middle of the night for this event, so we really appreciate your participation. We would also like to thank the emerging researchers for your participation here, for your interaction, and the great questions you have sent us before. And we are planning another online event in the autumn, and look forward to seeing everyone here again, so that the emerging researcher community could grow and to continue for the interaction. Yes, and we would like the guests of the roundtable to stay here in the room for a few minutes for debriefing with us, and say goodbye to the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.